let's expand a little bit more about Kamala's loss, right? They were trying to create a narrative that somehow the black folks were not sufficiently supporting the Harris ticket, as if it's on 13% of the population, which blacks, the black identity is defined as that percent of the population, as if it's their duty to do what's right for America. What about everybody else? Latino men failed. White women, I'm talking about the majority, okay? And this is nothing personal on anybody. I'm Latino, by the way. I'm a Latino man, okay? I feel several identities. I'm a Latino man. I'm a black man, all of that. So Latino men for Harris failed. White women for Harris failed. White men for Harris failed. Latina women for Harris, success. Black women came out bonkers. Black men, success. Again, we have to learn to put the blame where it's at. And the problem, even with some of what I said Bernie speaks about, is that he has to have the entire and full picture when you're making some of these statements. So let's go ahead and listen to what Joyanne Reid had to say here, because I think it is important, her statement, and then we'll go right into Basil's statement, because what he said as well is apropos. So let's go ahead and start with Joyanne Reid, and then we'll proceed with Basil.
But in the end, if they didn't make their numbers and essentially exceed the numbers that Joe Biden had in the suburbs, and I think we have to be blunt about why. Black voters came through for Kamala Harris. White women voters did not. That is what it appears happened in that state, is that if you can't flip enough white women, and we've talked about this on this set numerous times, is that you have a state where you've got a 6-week abortion or a 12-week abortion. I think theirs might be 12 weeks.
Yep.
But it's a state where women lost their reproductive rights, where there was a very heavy push to get women to focus on not putting in place, electing, putting back into the White House the person who was responsible for taking those rights away and restoring them. But that message obviously was not enough to get enough white women to vote for Vice President Harris, a fellow woman. This will be the second opportunity that white women in this country have to change the way that they interact with the patriarchy. And, God bless Shannon Watts, who was trying to have that conversation. But if people aren't receptive to it, and if people vote more, party line or more on race than on gender and on protecting their gender, there's really not much more that you can do but tell people what the risks are and leave it to them to do the right thing.
And, I got into trouble at Daily Kos because when Hillary Clinton lost, I wrote a whole blog about saying women have it much harder than anyone else, including black men. The fact that Obama could be president and Hillary couldn't. And again, both of them are qualified. Both of them are neoliberals. Okay. But one could get elected, and we bring Kamala as well. And the same thing happens. And we see the same breakdown, that apprehension to work and support a woman, and especially now a woman of color. That had implications. A lot of those older women, in fact, what Joyanne Reid did with the numbers, and this is important. Joyanne Reid showed that, Gen Z and all these other Gen Z, everybody below Gen X supported Kamala. They supported Kamala. But Gen X, they just couldn't get away from the patriarchy. They just couldn't do it. And it is something that has to be worked on, because if you are willing, because of your own racial prejudices, to put your daughter's life, your daughter's reproductive life in jeopardy, that tells you about the psychological chains that your mind is in. I want you to listen to Basil, because he goes a step further between the Latino, Black, etc., along with our former congressman. Check this out, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Basil, your top takeaways. What message did American voters send?
Well, a good chunk of the American voter wanted to take their country back, and we will soon see what that means. There are levels of sexism and racism that clearly a lot of people in this country are willing to tolerate, which is also something that, we may have woken up in the same country in a sense, but that becomes much more clear this morning. I would also say that there were conversations for over a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks about how Black men weren't doing their part. Black people did their part and did everything they needed to do, including the Black woman who ran. So this isn't, and going to a point that Mike Memoli had made earlier, this isn't a democratic problem per se, because it's not a problem that can be solved with a campaign. These are deep-rooted issues in our country that we absolutely need to address. And frankly, I think that, and as we're talking about big D democratic politics, the coalition that we had relied on is now 30 years old, and it has frayed. And that is something that I think as a party going forward, folks need to figure out what that coalition is going to look like.
Julian, your thoughts on that? Because then I'm interested in Basil's part about a coalition that is frayed. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, I think that remains to be seen, right? We've seen other high watermarks for Republicans. George W. Bush getting about 44% of the vote. Reagan did well in the 1980s. There was a time when people thought of the Latino community as voters more as up for grabs, right? And then when Obama changed that a few years ago, and got basically 73%, and then everybody started talking about the community as just Democrats. I think this election showed that they are more up for grabs. And I think the message that resonated was an economic message. Largely, the Latino community is diverse, obviously, different places and so forth, but it's basically a working class community and a very aspirational one. And Trump lies a lot, but one of the things he said in every speech was, when I was president, we had the greatest economy, and look what we have now with high gas prices and high grocery prices. And I think that enough people bought that. And we're going to spend a lot of time, I know, trying to untangle that. But fundamentally, I think that was the biggest factor with the community.
And back to Basil's point again, I mean, did the community do their part? Did the Latino community did their part in this election?
Yeah, I think this narrative is setting in that worries me somehow, that blames the Latino community. And I think that you got to give every community their agency. Right? I mean, they're responding like anybody else would. On top of that, even if you believe the exit poll, 53% of Latinos supported Kamala Harris, right? And so it's still a majority and a positive part of the Democratic coalition. And I think that Democrats need to build on that and really, really understand what happened. They basically got to do the analog of what Republicans did after Romney lost in 2012. They did that autopsy to figure it out. Yeah. And Democrats, I think, need to figure that out.
I got to say, and this is not, and I want to be clear, this is not about finger pointing to specific communities. It's not. But there was finger pointing in saying that this community of Black folk, Black men in particular, but Black people in general, what are we going to do? Are we going to get behind the candidate? And that happened. So my point is
that was a discussion that happened in both sides of the aisle.
And there was some growth that Trump saw in places like Wisconsin, right?
I have
members of the Black community, Black voters.
He was going to pick people off in different communities anyway. That's to be expected. But my point is that, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about who's going to do their part. And the folks that need to do their part did their part. And that's why I don't want to single anybody out. What I do want to single out is the fact that there was blatant racism and sexism in this campaign cycle. And my question is, what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about the fact that language was directed towards all of us at this table, whether you're Latino, African American, or as a woman? The language that he used to define and describe Nancy Pelosi in the last day did not seem to matter. And no campaign and no party can really fix that until we find a way forward. And I think that, as you asked me about my takeaway, that to me is the root of all of this, that we have not addressed that core issue in our country.
And he nails it. That's why I wrote that article about, don't blame Kamala. It's America. Don't blame Kamala. Look, she's not the perfect candidate, and Trump is a horrendous candidate. But she had policies that were going to help Americans. That Medicare policy that she was talking about, the millions of Americans, including a lot of those women who voted against her, that are taking care of their mothers, their grandmothers, their kids at the same time. And they voted against that. That is sick. And it puts a lot of credence into what P just said when she says, Egberto, Willies, I never understood how students failed open book tests.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number 1, subscribe to our channel, and number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.